Welcome to Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois. My research interests are media studies, media archaeology, cultural theory, and Christianity and leftist politics.
My name is Dean Detloff. I am a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, and I research all kinds of things here. And lately I've been making a lot of forts for my cats, so still on that good cat research right now, but it's moved on from cat eye infections to cat housing. That's my new task.
That's good. That's nice of you.
Yeah, I mean, they like it, you know.
Yeah, function of the oblique for cats.
That's right, yeah. It is a lot of slanting blanket roofs, so I'm still working on the floors, but one of these days.
Yeah. That's a Paul Virilio joke for all you guys out there who don't know or care about that. Just throwing it out there. All right, well, today we're doing something really cool and a little bit different. We're not just focusing on revolutionary politics as such, but today we're talking with Sarah Ngu, who works with both Religious Socialism, a group within the DSA, and Church Clarity, a website that allows people to submit churches to a database that scores them according to their policies on LGBTQ people. A really greatly needed resource in the world, I think. So Religious Socialism is a group that we'll talk about more in the conversation with her, but Church Clarity, we kind of want to set up a little bit. Basically, the idea behind Church Clarity is that it's a website where you can go and submit a church, and then they will do some research on the back end, looking through the policy, looking at the denomination, emailing the pastors, and so on. And then based on that information, they rank the church as one of the sort of these categories, either being undisclosed, unclear non-affirming, unclear affirming, clear non-affirming, clear affirming, actively discerning, and verified clear. Okay, so lots of different uses of the word clear here that are kind of interesting and fun in their own way. But basically it's a really helpful tool for just like figuring out if a church is maybe worth going to in some ways. So we talked to Sarah about socialism, LGBTQ liberation, and some really neat projects that she's invested in to help Christians think through both of those things. Before we get any further, though, we have a handful of like housekeeping, podcast keeping things to take care of. So first of all, you might have heard the new intro tunes. Dean, do you want to tell us what's up with that?
Yeah, so Amaria Shea Armstrong, who was a guest on the show a while back, we talked about pizza and also a paper that she had written about Paul and Hagar. She made it for us, which is very cool and exciting. Amaria makes a lot of other kinds of beats and songs in addition to being good at reading and writing. So, yeah, we asked her to do it, and she came through pretty well, I'd say. A+. Thank you,
yeah,
Amaria.
It's so cool.
It is very cool.
It's amazing. Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, we were gonna we we're gonna put some hot quotes from past episodes over the top of it, and maybe someday we will, but we've been so busy and it's just like good enough on its own, so why spoil it?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Number 2 on the housekeeping agenda is a quick iTunes review. We've gotten a few more since we've taken a break from reading them. If this is a part of the podcast that you like and value in any way, you can keep it going by continuing to submit reviews to iTunes. Okay. So here it is, the iTunes review that we've been neglecting to read since October. Oh my gosh. Nice. Okay, this is from username Just Fishin' for Religion on October 24th. Oh, nice. Hot username, that's good. Also, the title of this is so good. The title is Pedagogy of the Impressed, and it is 5 out of 5 stars. This is what we've been missing out on and not doing these. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So Just Fishing for Religion says, I stumbled across your podcast through a recommendation posted on the Partially Examined Life's Facebook page. Oh, that's weird. All right. Good going. Somebody.
Getting around.
Yeah. I'm a former Catholic who is now a practicing Unitarian Universalist. Unlike common sentiment amongst many of my self-exiled formerly Catholic UU comrades, I assert that my Catholic upbringing was the start of my social justice ministry. The Magnificast speaks to this part of me. I have found your podcast to be a real inspiration in this pursuit, as it fuses my libertarian socialist politics with my gnosis. This is no small feat, and one that has eluded me until very recently. I frequently mine your scriptural references and exegesis to bring to my church, to remind us Universal Unitarians, or Unitarian Universalists, whichever. I don't remember which one comes first. that Christian wisdom is important too, and in keeping with our commitment to universalism, So they say, keep up the good work. Keep turning water into seltzer, and may we one day liberate all pizza lovers everywhere from capital suppression. That's really important. That's the most important part right there. I mean, pizza for everybody, according to their
That's
need.
right. Yeah, and according to their ability. So, like, I can eat a whole large pizza, and I would really like to, but I don't because I feel guilty. And after the revolution, I will feel no guilt. I will just indulge.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's what that phrase actually means. According to your ability is like, can you eat an entire pizza by yourself? And yes, I can.
The answer is 100%.
But do I need to? Also, yes. Yeah, I also need to do that.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah. Probably like 75%, but still, that's more than 50.
I would say so. Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. I went to a Unitarian church exactly one time, and everyone was very nice. And I even told them that I was Catholic, and they said, that's great. So I've got positive experiences with Unitarians.
Yeah,
that one time.
I don't know how you couldn't like the UU church. It's good stuff.
Cool. So that's neat. It's cool to see that we're like getting around in weird places. Who knows? What else you got for us?
Oh, yeah. If you follow us on Twitter, then you would have saw that a few weeks ago we started a book giveaway contest. So if you retweeted a link to one of our episodes, you could have been entered to win a book. And the book was Katie Grimes' Fugitive Saints. And you could have also been entered to win a sweet Magnificast pin or button, as I think button is the nomenclature we're going with here. They're not pins.
Yeah,
that's important.
Right. Definite buttons.
So anyways, we have a winner. You can check our Twitter to check that out and see who won. It was cool. We gave away a book. I don't know. It's a really solid sort of marketing PR move. We're very savvy marketers, so as you know already. So that's out there.
If you didn't win that book, by the way, you should buy it. We talked to Katie for an episode about that book in particular, and it is extremely good. I have a lot of good things to say about it. I've been just recommending it to everybody that I know. So, like, I don't know, spend the money. Katie deserves it.
Yeah, for sure. If you follow us on Twitter, you can see more opportunities to win books and pins and whatever else we figure out to give away. I don't know what else apart from books and pins would give you, but something.
like pens that haven't quite run out of their ink yet. I don't know.
I will give you the
stuff laying around my apartment.
Proof of purchase off all of the LaCroix I bought over the last month. Yeah, okay. So maybe those things too. So anyways, keep an eye out for future Magnificast giveaways of stuff and junk, and also very good books.
No purchase necessary.
Yeah, no purchase necessary. Terms and details apply. So, okay, on top of all that, some other really important news is that we're making Magnificast t-shirts. That's really cool. Again, check our Twitter account, and you can see a preview of what they look like. Shout out to Benjamin Wildflower in case he listens to this. I don't know if he does. He made this really, really dope Mary sort of picture, and he made it for us. So it says the Magnificast under it. Anyways, those will be coming in the next few months. It takes some time for him to make it all. So anyways, that's coming. Keep an eye out. We'll start like an Etsy store or something. I don't know how to do anything. Figure it out. I am a baby.
What's the unionized version of Etsy?
Yeah, I don't know. What is it?
Like
is there one?
Carrying it by mule? I don't know.
Yeah,
someone tell us if you know. Like, please actually do tell us.
Yeah, that would be really good. Well, okay. So yeah, t-shirts, buttons, we'll end up figuring out a way to sell them to you at some point. Patreon subscribers will get free buttons. That's happening. I just haven't done it yet. So sorry. Okay, one more final and like probably the dumbest announcement. Maybe I don't know, it's not dumb. It's actually really cool, but like it's dumb. You'll get the joke in a minute. Okay, so on December 11th, a monumental occasion is occurring, and that monumental occasion is the very first ever live Magnificast recording. Okay, so it's funny. So Dean is coming down to Greenville. We're going to have kind of a conversation on campus live in front of some students. We're talking about the integration of Christianity and politics and how that plays out in some different lives. So we're going to bring in a few guests, talk to them, probably get some good and funny student questions. So if you want to come to Greenville on December 11th, you're welcome to. My house will be full of people, so you can't really stay there, but you could hang out. I don't know. Anyways, we'll definitely post it in our stream of usual podcasts every week, so you'll get to hear it whether you're there or not, whether you want to or not. We're gonna force you to listen to it.
That's right, for free.
Yeah. We're gonna apply force and sneak into your room at night and put headphones in your ears, and you will have to listen to it for free. Okay.
Congratulations.
All right, so let's stop all of this nonsense and go to our conversation with Sarah.
So, Sarah, we're really intrigued by the work that you do, both with Church Clarity and in the DSA with Religious Socialism. And we basically, we've seen these things on the internet, but we don't know that much about them. So, could you just start maybe by telling us a little bit about yourself and then your work with those two, at least those two parts of your life?
So, I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I've been in New York for a good while now, although not originally from here. And sort of my day-to-day living is mostly as a ghostwriter of sorts, but it's an occupation that gives me a fair amount of free time, which is a bit of a luxury, and I invest that free time in a lot of projects. So one of them is the DSA. Kind of looped into it fairly recently. Socialism is definitely a new thing that I was exploring, that I've been exploring, and the Religious Socialism working group specifically, which used to be a lot more active and robust. I think they had a quarterly mailing they would send out to churches, and pastors would subscribe and talk about their thoughts on socialism. They still have the paper copies of that if you want to take a look. But then I think, I'm not sure how it kind of died down, but maybe the Religious Right maybe killed it. I'm not super sure what happened, but now it was dormant for a while, and now it's picking back up. So I met with Maxine Phillips, who's the main person who runs it in New York. She's based in New York, and she said, "Hey, you have some journalism skills." I said, "I do. I do some freelance reporting. Do you want to do interviews for us?" I was like, "Sure." She's like, "Do you want to do a podcast for us?" I said, "I've never done that." But luckily, a friend of mine who I know from college, I went to J school, has a decent audio editing production background, so she helps me produce it. I guess I'm usually on the other side of these interviews. I interview people of faith who do progressive work in some way. Some socialists, some not. Some Christians, some not. The last two episodes, actually, we're hoping to put up are with someone who's Muslim, someone who's Jewish, so that's pretty exciting. So there's a blog, there's a whole thing beyond the podcast, but we're looking to kind of expand the team and make it better. And I tell a lot of people about your podcast because I feel like it's a good, a lot of people in the group obviously are Christian as well, so I was like, if you want really solid leftist stuff, especially on a theoretical level, I tell them to go to you guys. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow.
That's kind of you.
It is.
True.
Yeah.
I just offhand, I would say I feel like a lot of progressive Christian stuff tends to be a more insular conversation. I feel like your podcast is something that I could share to anyone who identifies as a leftist, regardless of belief or faith, and they would take it seriously. They'll find it valuable, informative, that kind of thing. So that's a high bar. And then what else? The Church Clarity stuff. Oh yeah, that is also a recent project. I got looped into over the summer, which is a database that scores churches and how clearly they communicate their LGBTQ policies. And I kind of got interested in it by way of my journalism sort of kind of skill set or experience, because I see it really as an investigative journalistic piece where we crowdsource publicly available information into one centralized place and organize it where it's clear where churches are at. And that was what intrigued me about this, and I can go more into a bit more of that, but I more or less at this point run the database for Church Clarity. There's another guy, Tim, who runs the marketing and branding and all outward facing stuff, and another guy named George who kind of does everything else, big vision stuff, partnership, what have you. So I manage a team of volunteers, about 5 to 8 people, like random people scattered throughout the U.S. There's a person who helps us from her sailboat in Grenada. She's like retired.
That's awesome.
I know, she's like
That's
a retired
crazy.
mom who's like really passionate and doesn't know what to do at the time. Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, that's we get submissions through the database. Right now we're about 1,100 submissions, and we're about 1 month old. So it's been good. A lot of submissions, and we're slowly going through them. We have a pretty rigorous vetting process, so but we're catching up and slowly getting more and more published.
That sounds so cool. Man, good projects that you're involved
Yep.
with. Well, can we start off talking about religious socialism for a bit, and then we can kind of move
Sure.
to church clarity? I think we have a few
Yeah.
kind of points about both. All right. Okay, so religious socialism, it used to be sort of like a thing in the United States, more of like you said it was like a publishing sort of project where people would send out mailings to pastors. That's really cool. What's the connection between religious socialism and the DSA? I guess the only thing I really know about religious socialism is what you've just said, and then also the Wikipedia page that I've read. So maybe you could give us a little bit more about the history or the idea behind religious socialism and how it's connected to the DSA.
The Religious Socialism group is older than the DSA. It started in the 70s by John Court, a Catholic activist in the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. It had a print newsletter for about 30 years, which you can find if you click on religiousocialism.org. It has the archives of that. I think it started in 1977. But then after the founder died at age 92, they stopped the publication, but now they're trying to reboot with the website. So I don't know if we're officially a working group yet. I think are trying to file the paperwork. I mean, the DSA in general has like ballooned, and so there are all these groups, the socialist feminist group, the environmental group, the tech DSA people, media DSA, So I think right now DSA, it seems like, is in a place where they're just trying to get like systems and processes in place so that people are communicating with one another, and there's like things on paper, like actual governance systems, that type of thing. What else? I think most people in the group, from this email, come from Catholic, evangelical, Protestant backgrounds. Actually, quite a few Catholics, but we have, people are Buddhists, Wiccans, Jews, Muslims, what have you. DSA in general, I think, is particularly compared to the ISO or some other organizations, tries to be like a big tent organization. So you would try to be as intersectional and coalition-minded as possible while we're staying true to like our core tenets. That's a little bit about the flavor.
That's really cool. I was looking through some of the blog archives, and I do really appreciate that sort of like interfaith, or I mean, not interfaith, I guess, like just the different faiths represented. That's not just Christians. I really like that sort of perspective from lots of different folks. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's cool.
Have you had any experience kind of working through these connections? Like, has there been anything that's kind of jumped out where, I don't know, maybe you've been surprised by some of the ecumenical or interfaith conversations that have happened around some of these organizing efforts, or is it still kind of maybe too young to like get that far yet? But I'm just like very curious about how coalitions come together, because they're hard to manage, but sometimes they're also like surprisingly exciting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through the most recent sort of religious socialism meeting we had in New York City. I think it was still predominantly Christian, but people were, I think, talking about like different. I think what we talked about was Israel. I think that was the big thing that we talked about. That was like, oh, okay, this doesn't usually talk about these things in like in like Christian progressive circles, because I think I was trying to be a bit troublemaker. I was like, well, what do we feel about someone who is pro-life or anti-abortion but otherwise identifies with the tenets of DSA? How do you guys think about what it looks like to create a space for people with maybe different views on parts of DSA's platform? And so once we got into abortion stuff and pro-life Catholics, what have you, then the BDS vote came up because the DSA in a recent national convention voted to endorse a BDS resolution, which is the boycott, divestment, sanctions resolution for all Israel stuff. And there were some people in the group, Christians included, who disagreed with it, so we talked about that. And it seemed like it was almost like this is a space for people who have almost these other commitments and other traditions that orient them differently on certain issues. And this is a space for people to kind of bring that to the table and not feel like afraid of like voicing the fact that maybe they are pro-life or maybe they don't support BDS. So it became that. But I think the most salient thing that so far I've encountered, we're not at the point where we're organizing marches together or, I don't know, calling politicians. There is an interfaith group that does that in New York City, and they do really good work. But most recently I did record an interview with someone who was Jewish, and I was talking to him about Israel stuff, and he just paused and said, I think we Jews are held to a double standard because we're always asked to account for the actions of the state of Israel, but Christians are never asked to account for the actions of the United States, even though its founders were Christian. And, you can insert X country at this point in there. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. I think at first, probably on the podcast interview, I reacted a bit defensively. I was like, well, we're asked to account for other things, blah, blah. But I think it was good to get that kind of challenge from him and realize that, yeah, there's a lot of assumptions we take as normative as Christians, and it was helpful to hear a challenge from him.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really neat. I'm glad these conversations are happening. I remember when I went to the first, I'm a DSA member, I went to the first group meeting, and like that was a big conversation we had was just, I'm in St. Louis area, and one of the very first sort of organizational kind of questions we had was like, how do we actually appeal to people who are religious and conservative? Because there are some things that we can see, shaking out where they would be on board, and some things where they wouldn't be so much. So it's just cool to hear other people having those conversations, especially from different faith backgrounds, and how that plays out. That's incredibly needed.
Are you guys hoping to kind of develop into a group that organizes religious communities, or do you feel like right now it sounds like there's a lot of strength in just kind of having that open space where people can come and be honest about how they feel about their faith and about their politics coming together? Like, is there a kind of down the road idea, like what would it mean for you to be a working group in the DSA, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I wish I attended the last meeting last week that I could give you more updates, but I had something where I couldn't get out of it. I would say that I think that's definitely on the table. Most likely my suspicion is that we would explore like what interfaith justice organizing organizations are already doing in New York City, because in New York City you have a fair amount of whatever organization you're looking for, someone's already kind of doing it. So my sense is that when, at least the meeting I attended, it seemed like there was an appetite for just to have discussion and conversation before we jump into action per se. So I think we proposed that, before a meeting, before we meet, we like read an article or we listen to an interview, and we gather and we kind of discuss it and get some thoughts going. So that definitely seemed to resonate with people when I was there. And I think we'll continue building that community and that conversation. And then presumably the next stage for that would look like some sort of action and organizing.
Yeah, that's really neat. It just seems like a very cool thing to kind of watch the religious left, I guess, find its voice again, find out how to work together under these different organizations. We are curious a little bit about how you kind of see your work there with Religious Socialism and your work with Church Clarity kind of working together. How do you kind of navigate those things? Do you feel like these are separate projects, like different parts of your life? Do you feel like they kind of are motivated from a similar stream of being a Christian or being a leftist or whatever? How do those two things come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing they probably have in common is that there's a religious faith component, and I think I've been a Christian longer than I have been a socialist or leftist, so that underlying identity or I don't know, practice or belief system, however you put it, is something that motivates a lot of my choices that I make, or how to spend my time, what I get involved with. I would say when I knew I had to do this interview, I thought you might ask this question. When I stepped back and thought about like what is the overlap, right? What is the Venn diagram here? On one hand, they do feel different a lot, because in addition to Church Clarity stuff, I do like queer Christian sort of community building in New York City, based out of my church with a few people, but then also expands beyond the church. And a lot of that stuff is very identity based. It's about your experiences, about your stories, and you're pulling people from a cross section of economic backgrounds, typically. And no one's talking. There's not like a materialist analysis, so to speak, in these conversations. And then when you get when in the socialist kind of space, one of the reasons why I find it refreshing actually is that identities do matter, but we're also going to have like a more comprehensive and robust kind of analysis about something that affects identities, but is not just about identities. So I actually appreciate the differences in the worlds, but I think when it comes specifically to the similarities that I see between my project at Church Clarendon and Project Religious Socialism, I think in either case you're bucking up against this system that, you can call the religious right, you can call whatever, evangelical old guard, but regardless, it's a system that has a lot of power and a lot of money. And I think religious socialism, I think at this point we don't really have an action plan, at least that I know of. Maybe they had it in the last meeting where they're saying, here's how we're going to take down the religious right or build the religious left.
Gotta get in on that.
I mean, at this point, it's like putting out content, it's like conversation, like, things that we're all basically trying to do. But what I appreciate about Church Clarendon is that it's a different angle into change. We're not just trying to make a case for why gay people should be in the church. I mean, that's not even part of our immediate concern. It's a mode of enacting change that is about applying pressure on like these systems of power and money, and I think and in doing it in a way that holds individuals accountable as much as we can. So we don't just have a church on a database. We have the pastor's name and sometimes the pastor's email or Twitter handle on the database. So we're sort of saying you can't hide behind, the pulpit or the website. We're going to hold you directly accountable as much as we can. And of course, the system that they're operating on is much larger than them. But it's our way as much as we can to call out the machinations, so to speak, that go on behind the scenes. So I don't know. Long story short, I think this gets into a slightly longer thing, but what ultimately prevents a lot of churches from becoming clearer, or not even clearer, but in this case, just affirming in theology, and by affirming, I mean, like, okay with queers, essentially, is not even the pastor's theology, because you have a lot of pastors who are personally sympathetic or personally affirming, but from just anecdotally, a lot of what prevents them is money. They're afraid they'll lose the funding from the denomination, or that the building that the denomination owns is going to be taken away from them. So I can go into like a lot of examples along those lines, but it boils down basically to who owns the assets, what donors are going to leave when they find out, and these things are the things that really slow churches down on like any kind of social progress. So I think in some way the battles are very similar.
Yeah. That is very fascinating. I mean, underlying the kind of material causes underlying why somebody or why a particular church wouldn't want to be affirming or clear about that, I think is a really cool way of actually understanding what's at stake in those kinds of conversations. Anecdotally, I go to this school in Toronto called the Institute for Christian Studies. And in the 1990s, there was a pretty famous conference here where two professors famously came out in favor of LGBT relationships in the church. And our school is almost shut down and almost taken away from us by the denomination for that particular stance, which is crazy because the school has a history of being opposed to unbridled capitalism and being opposed to racism and all kinds of really kind of hot button issues, but that was the one that the denomination was like, no, you can't do that. Like, that's the last straw. So there is something very unique about LGBT issues and kind of the material consequences of them.
What denomination is your school part of?
It comes out of the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch Reformed movement in North America.
Yeah, Reformed churches are interesting. Yeah, there are all kinds of ways in which churches. There are some churches who try to defy their denomination, and they can kind of get away with it because their region is pretty progressive. Because the way discipline is enforced tends to be regional based. Once we get into like denominational, like real like more mainline denominational stuff, like the Reformed Church of America is a good example. The United Methodist Church is another good example. But non-denominational churches or like so to speak non-denom, they still have networks that provide funding affiliations. And actually, those it seems like tend to be a lot more punitive. Like Southern Baptist churches are supposed to let churches just go with their conscience. That's what it means to be a Baptist, right? It's like versus a Episcopalian church, which is a lot more hierarchical. Baptists are supposed to give churches more local autonomy, but when they find out a church is affirming, they will vote every time to kick them out of the denomination. So it kind of becomes de facto a very like tightly policed thing. So yeah, I come from a non-denominational background, so this is a bit of my crash course in learning about denominations and the craziness that they operate. But yeah, it is the red. I think it's the red line. I was talking to someone who's Jewish who's like, yeah, I feel like Israel issues tend to be the red line for Jews, and I think LGBTQ stuff, you can ask someone that's progressive and race, we'll talk about, the evils of capitalism or exploitation of labor, but it's like, oh, but this is how I read the Bible, so I'm sorry, this is where I am. Yeah. Right.
That is really fascinating to hear about. Well, this is a question that maybe takes us a little step back, but I want to hear you kind of talk us through this. So I submitted my church to Church Clarity, and because like LGBTQ issues are contentious in my denomination, I think it's like really important. I would love to hear what my pastors actually say and how they respond to this. I'm on the board of administrators, so I imagine that like somehow I'll get roped into this conversation even at some point, which will be very, very funny.
What's the name of your church, Matt? So I'll look it up right now.
Yeah, it's called St. Paul's Free Methodist Church. I submitted the other day. I don't know if I submitted all of the information.
Oh, okay.
I think I did.
Got it.
Yeah, it's a really nice and liberal denomination that has not made a very clear statement on this fact. So I thought it'd be really fun to do this.
As of today, even. I think we just emailed them asking them to fill out our survey, which is a 4-question survey that says, will you hire, ordain, marry, and baptize an LGBTQ person? And the reason why we put churches through the survey system is if we cannot really discern their policy on their website. So your church, it looks like, is pretty unclear.
Yep.
And we could come to a conclusion because essentially, more or less, if there's nothing but you're part of a denomination that more or less is non-affirming, in this case, is the Free Methodist Church under the United Methodist?
No,
or is it separate altogether? Okay. Yeah, so it looks like, we'll see what the church says.
Yeah.
Does your denomination overall have a policy? Is there a denominational policy overall?
I'm pretty sure that there is, and it is not positive.
Do you know how discipline-oriented they are?
Very much so.
Okay, so most likely your church is going to be scored as unclear and non-affirming.
Well, but so that's disappointing, obviously, but also unsurprising and kind of helpful in some ways too, to be, I guess, labeled by some kind of external body that drives us to have some different conversations. So I see it being pretty positive actually for us if that is something that happens. So is that that's how the process works though? Somebody submits the name of their church, and you guys do the research on the back end and send them a survey, and then you kind of you gather enough information to label them in one of your categories?
Yeah, for most churches, we don't need to send them a survey. We send surveys if we think the church might potentially be affirming, but we're not super clear. Yeah. In this case, I think, I don't know, I just opened it up, but most likely this church I don't know if we even really need the survey. It depends how they come back, but most likely we'll just do non-affirming. But yeah, our team, we're looking through websites, we're listening to sermons, so we have a guy on our team who transcribes sermons using a software he uses. Wow. And we're digging up like old constitutional bylaws, and a lot of it is not, some of it's just our team doing a lot of exhaustive research, but a lot of it is congregants telling us where to look.
Yeah.
So we've had people just give us here's the link to this church's newsletter campaign where they announce their position, but it's not on their website, and they'll send us the links to look at that, and then we're like, okay, great, as long as there's a evidence we can point to, so it's not just my experience. So
right.
We try not to be like Yelp or Glassdoor. Then we'll put it. Then we'll score it, and if we can't find anything, we'll rate it as undisclosed, and who knows what happens there. But But yeah, we're trying to apply a little bit of urgency to these questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. I mean, they are urgent questions. I don't want to completely derail the conversation with like stuff about my church, but my church has a lot of like laity preaching there pretty often. So we have lots of sermons that actually end up being kind of open and affirming in some interesting ways. But it still doesn't change the denominational stance, nor does it necessarily change the official stance of our church. So I just hope that like I would hope that this like it somehow makes a better conversation in our denomination about these issues, and so we can be upfront about like what it is that we're actually about if I don't know if it's important to people. So it's cool. I really appreciate this work so much.
One thing I thought was really interesting about this process is that you don't look just at doctrine or sermons per se, but you evaluate policy. And that's such an interesting way of looking at churches, especially in terms of their affirming stance, because it's like, well, you may have one particular pastor or one particular priest who seems to be open and affirming, but that doesn't necessarily translate to what it would actually mean to be an LGBT person going to that church, trying to participate in it in a full kind of open way. And I mean, I hadn't even really thought about that, which makes me a bad materialist, I guess. Like, you know, when I thought about what it means to be like affirming, it hadn't really crossed my mind that you would also have to ask these kind of like more boring questions, which are actually the more like useful questions. Like what would happen if somebody tried to, you know, like be on a board or something. Like that's really a cool way of going about it.
Yeah, and it's funny, in the survey we could include a question of like, will you let a LGBTQ person tithe to the church or give money? But it's pointless because of course they would, you know, like we'll take money for anyone basically. So if you want to get into like more materialist stuff, you have people who are contributing money, who are contributing labor as a volunteer, like emotional labor, you know, all that kind of stuff, without being clear as to the terms of their like status in the church. There was we get tons of stories. It was just recently a friend was telling me that there was a church that was very queer affirming in terms of language. They let queer people lead worship, you know, lead small groups, be really visible, but drew the line at officiating marriages. And that wasn't clear to a lot of people until they got really invested and kind of involved in the church. So it's just, it is. I think in some ways, like businesses, I mean, there's an argument to make whether or not this is equivalent to false advertising, which is technically illegal and regulated, right? In like business for-profit sectors. If I tell you that these pants cost $10, but it's really $50, and you don't find out until your credit card is charged, you know, or something like that, that's like, you can, you know, there's a fine. I don't know what the process is. But churches, for some reason, although they're tax subsidized and everything, that seem to have a much greater leeway in how they communicate. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Well, so you said that you were more from a non-denominational background, and this has been illuminating in terms of denomination. Have you found many instances where churches kind of like distinguish themselves from their denomination, or does it seem like mostly people kind of stick with the party or church line, I guess?
Yes, there are instances in which they go against the denomination. I think the clearest example we saw was a United Methodist church. United Methodists generally are non-affirming, and they technically will discipline you if so, but once again, discipline depends on the region. This thing is a church called Chicago Temple, and it says not only will we officiate same-sex marriages, but we will set up legal funds in case our pastor gets prosecuted for doing so. So they're very clear, like, we're here to defy our denomination, and we will bear the consequences of that. Some churches do essentially do that, but they're not as clear on the website due to, like, I don't know, the pastor's not super tech savvy, and whoever's running it is like a volunteer or whatnot. So for those churches, in order to really sift, like, you know, the sheep from the goats and whatnot, that's why we did the survey, just to say, okay, tell them, just be super clear, will you do this, will you not do this, etc. And what we found is some churches will respond to the survey and say yes on this, but no on these. And some churches say yes on everything, and we're not allowed to, but we are, you know, going against our denomination. So it's a way of this is in some ways going beyond websites. Now we're sort of creating a new standard of clarity beyond just like what information you have available.
Okay, so there's this word that I hear whenever I go to a church, especially Protestant churches specifically. This word I hear is hospitality, and I'm thinking about how what you guys are doing is actually like really beneficial towards the idea of hospitality in churches, and I wonder what you'd have to say about that. Churches are really concerned about being seeker sensitive or whatever, and they want to like bring people in and all that kind of good stuff, giving you coffee and donuts, which is like, I don't know, basically the reason to go to church in the first place. But in a way, it seems like church clarity is about making churches more hospitable towards LGBTQ people. How do you see that playing out? Do you know people that like use this website to kind of figure out what church they really want to go to, or do you feel like this is something else?
Yeah, I mean, lots of good questions. When it comes to hospitality, I mean, I would argue actually that I think we are creating a better, more hospitable environment for people to walk into. I mean, no one likes to be deceived. No one wants to be misled. So just eliminating that harm or that potential for sense of betrayal is like obviously a good thing, I think. And I don't know, there's no good argument against it, I think. Although people have found ways to argue against what we're doing, but so far the arguments seem to not be so great. But I would argue it's actually the desire to be hospitable that is causing a lack of clarity. Oddly enough, at least the veneer of hospitality.
Yeah.
Churches want to be seen as welcoming people, inclusive, we're here for everyone. And some of that might just be like a very instrumentalist, strategic thing of like, get the gays in the door and then hopefully they'll convert or something like that.
Right.
But some of that might just be like, we don't have bad PR, we don't want to be like a Westboro Baptist person, so, pat ourselves on our back for not saying like, God hates fags or something like that. We're at least better than them, but although from a positive standpoint, they're not that much different. So it's the hospitality thing, plus like political correctness, plus like all these like evangelical churches are really good at branding and marketing, I think. And just being like seen as very savvy. So, at least on their websites and their pastors and stuff like that. So yeah. I think there's that. In terms of the latter question you had was like why people go to our database. I mean, we've been around for like a month. I think certainly people have told us that they have been looking for a resource like this because they live in a place where maybe they're not in a super populous city, so they don't really know, what churches are out there that would be affirming it, and it's very exhausting to church attend, ask to speak to the minister. Hi, minister, I'm gay. Will you let me? Like all that. Like it's just like you're gonna email all churches to find out before you attend. Like there's just a lot of big rigmarole.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
And it's like it's a vulnerable thing. You're kind of embarrassed to like all that kind of stuff. So I think people are doing for that, but I think also people seem to be uploading churches to our website. To like warn other people, if that makes sense. There's someone who tweeted something, just like a person, not like a big name person, just like a regular person, and she said, if it is a she, I'll just say they said, it feels really empowering to put churches I've intended on church clarity. I don't want anyone else feeling the burn of a bait and switch.
On that note, have any churches responded to you kind of negatively based on like how you've labeled them on your website, or not so much?
I think most churches are trying to ignore it and hope, no one pays attention. We have gotten to a couple of conversations with, I think I can disclose this, the pastor of North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia, which is I think maybe the largest church in America or something like that. I don't really know. Mm-hmm. His name is Andy Stanley. Notoriously, like, really ambiguous. He'll say stuff like, churches should be the safest place for gay teenagers. But then, probably, it's, has no, like, clear policy stated anywhere on the website. Right. So, he, I think, reached out to one of us on Twitter through, like, direct messaging DMs and just said, and I think we asked him like, hey, we rated your church as undisclosed. Let us know if you want us to change your policy, your score based on your policy. And he wrote back something like, at North Point, we do not have a policy because policies draw a line in the sand, and we're not about, excluding or including people. So I was like, I think he definitely hired a PR team for that kind of wordsmithing.
You would think, like, I don't know, maybe you should draw a line in the sand over like homophobia or something. That seems like something you'd want to exclude. I don't know, maybe not.
It's a good line.
Yeah, it was like it's kind of like what it's smart. It's like rhetorically smart because it makes it seem like we're the bad guys for drawing a line in the sand and being divisive. But all we're doing is revealing the lines you already draw in the sand. Yeah. So, and anecdotally, from what I understand, this church, I mean, it's not on the website, but just from people I know, and I hope we don't get sued for slander, but it should be fine. In order to volunteer at that church in the childcare nursery, for instance, you have to sign a form saying that you will not engage in homosexual conduct, what have you. So they have, obviously, as a policy. I mean, you kind of run like a million people church without some policy. So it's just like, it's not only just rhetorically like what are you trying to do, but also just inaccurate. So I don't know. So there's that, and then there's the other guy who I sent you some tweet links to, Aaron McManus, who's just like, our clarity is love. And it's like, okay.
It's like the least clear position.
Yeah. This weekend I went off on this like really dumb Twitter rant about a really annoying and vague sermon I heard at my church on Sunday, and I think what you've said too kind of like resonates, that like Christian churches are very good at kind of empty rhetoric that doesn't really mean anything, or actually could mean everything, right? It's like enthymemic in the sense that people can just kind of fill in the blanks, based on what they want that to actually mean, whereas the policy might be different. So something I really appreciate about Church Clarity is that you guys don't necessarily go after doctrine on anyone's website, but you go after policy, and like that's what you actually evaluate. How have you guys found this to work, though? Do you find that like policy is sometimes like disconnected from doctrine, or do you think that the doctrine plays into it at all? How does that? Is there an actual connection? That's a good question.
There? So I would say, to be super precise, when it comes to scoring non-affirming churches, as long as we see evidence of non-affirming theology, we're going to take that as proxy for policy. So, but we do not make the same assumption on the other side. So if a pastor is going to give an affirming theology, or like say gay people are, or like whatever, good, married, have you, supportive trans people, whatever, we're not going to give them an affirming score at this point in time until we see like actual policies spelled out. And that's that's why we did the whole survey kind of thing, because we realized that, a good example is we're engaged in this, Facebook conversation. We have like a Church Clarity Advocates Facebook group, and there's someone in our group who belongs to a church that is affirming in every way except for marriages, but their workaround is they say we can't officiate your marriage in our building because you will belong to this denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church, which does not permit us to do so, but we'll happily refer you to a pastor who would do it and help you set it up, so to speak. So it's as close of a workaround as possible, and that's a good example of an affirming theology, but not affirming policy. And we had, it did cause some internal conflict within our teams. Like, what do we do with this church? How should we score it? Blah blah blah. And that's why we ended up being like, at the end of the day, labels of affirming and non-affirming get a little gray. We acknowledge, and that's why we did the survey. But I don't know if this church is actually going to fill out a survey because I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that's an example of a divergence of theology and policy.
So maybe just switching gears a little bit, I really like this project. And so Matt and I on this podcast, I guess, we talk a lot about communism, but we try to be intentional about not being too reductive toward we don't think that class liberation is like the ultimate liberation or something. And I think Christians have kind of an implicit notion of this, I guess, because we are so bad at like every single thing. As like a historical community, Christians aren't very good on things like race or gender identity or what have you. So in terms of LGBTQ liberation in the church specifically, do you feel like church clarity is a way of kind of advancing, the horizon of liberation by virtue of holding these people accountable and making people kind of be honest about how they feel? Do you feel like there are limits to it? What do you feel like Christians on the left might be able to contribute to that kind of broader project?
So your question is, how do we situate ourselves within like this broader, revolution or progressive movement within?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I like to think that we are... This is a question we've had. I think we provide the database to organize. So on both sides. So if you want to just look up all non-affirming churches in your area and like email the pastors and be like, hey, what's up? What's your policy? Or what, you're unclear. Can you be clearer? Which we create actually. It's a way for you to email the church right on our website and it'll pop up. I think I see it as similar to like call your representative. To find out there's a healthcare bill. I'm going to call my representative, be like, what is your position in this bill? I want you to vote this way. But it's also a way, I think, to potentially organize the left. So if we have a list of churches who are queer affirming, and then I think in March we're going to do women in leadership, and we have a list of churches who are supportive of women and egalitarian, and then if we might tackle race in the fall. And so once we get this kind of list in the database, I think that would be, it's just, if you want to do anything at large scale, you need data, I think. So that's what we hope to provide. And I think there's also just no way to have actual conversations about, theology or even policy until you know what the position is. Like my sister goes to a church that I know to be non-affirming because I just know people who have been in that church for a long time and have had conversations with the pastors. And I asked her, like, do you know your church's policy? And she said, well, my pastor has never really preached on it, so, I don't know. I don't think he's anti-gay or what have you. I was like, well, actually, he is. He just doesn't preach on it. But until she realizes that, she's not going to then have that follow-up conversation with the pastor to be like, hey, why is our church policy this way? I have a sister, blah, blah, blah. So I think just understanding the landscape and where people are and their positions and where people have staked their flags is just an important starting point so that you can begin to sort of talk honestly. I mean, people generally know, obviously, that churches are non-affirming, but to know that this church around the corner in my block, blah, 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 has this position, that changes the conversation a lot more. And hopefully leads to, like, action. So, I don't know. I think part of me struggles with, like, is it, I think what we're doing is important and, like, laying, I think, a foundational element for people to then take action and use our data and what have you. But I think I have a broader question in general if it's even, how much is it worth the time a while to try to change churches that are pretty conservative theology and happened for a long time and probably not going to change anytime soon, and how much is it more worth our while to invest in new churches or new denominations? And I think hopefully our database can show you kind of information about both sides, but that's a big kind of ongoing question for me, is like, should we be looking to revolutionize existing churches or just like start new communities? I don't know.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I do really like the aspect though, where it's just a collection of information about churches, and then you're like, okay, call your pastor, call your representative, kind of thing. The idea that you could democratize church policy in that way is kind of a funny and pretty radical idea, I suppose. I mean, usually church hierarchy is, magical, mysterious, etc. So putting a phone number by someone's name is like, okay, we'll call this guy and ask him what's up is pretty cool. I think that's really fun. Yep.
Yeah, and it's a bit trickier with Catholics, Dean, because I know you're Catholic based on what I hear from the podcast. Right. And I talked to someone just being like, hey, do you think we should put Catholics on our website? Like, what do you think is the best way to approach Catholic churches. And I've got kind of mixed feedback, so we're not going to move forward with that at this point in time, unless you have a strong opinion as to whether this would be useful for Catholic churches. Because the feedback I got was that even if churches are going to be like subversively affirming through like a variety of ways, and it's also there's some real limitations on what they cannot do, but what have you.
Right.
Most likely the priest is not going to want that information floating around in a very explicit way. And so Catholic church websites that are queer friendly, I think is the best way you can say it, will hint at that through saying we have an LGBT ministry, blah blah blah, but they're not going to then say like, and we're going to offer the sacraments of this and this to this person's partner if that person is dead, and we're going to have a burial, I don't know what the exact terminology is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, having ministries is basically the way that the Catholic Church gets around most things, for better and worse. So you can have like a gay affirming ministry, and then your church is kind of off the hook, because if someone has to get in trouble, it's going to be the people that run the ministry and not like the parish priest per se or something. So,
okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect a lot of Catholic parishes on church clarity, I guess. At least I wouldn't expect a lot of like clear affirming Catholic parishes, but boy, would I like to be surprised.
Yeah. Well, so that's good to know. I didn't know that about the ministries.
Yeah, I mean, that's not like a universal rule, but at least in my experience, that's how it's been, I guess. Yeah. Have you found like some denominations that you find are like more or less affirming? Like, are there just sort of themes of this denomination seems to be on kind of a trajectory toward being more and more affirming? Those kinds of data, has that come up at all?
Yeah, actually we have a spreadsheet that I've just opened up, where we have listed 33 denominations, and we have them organized by affirming, not affirming, how discipline-oriented they are, linked to policy, linked to like women's stuff. So looking at this list, the non-affirming column is definitely a lot more filled up than the affirming. But the thing you have to keep in mind, so affirming, what do I have here? I have American Catholic churches, which apparently I did not know existed, but that's a thing. And they're an affirming Catholic denomination. I don't know, not Roman Catholic, but you have the ELCA, the PCUSA, obviously Episcopal Church at large. But the thing it's important to keep in mind with affirming denominations is that none of them require their churches to be affirming.
Right.
So you could be an Episcopal church, but not be affirming. So that's it. It gets tricky. It's really more like they permit affirming churches to exist, but they're not going to enforce it per se. So yeah, I would say like coming from a non-denom background, there are a fair number. I've seen an increase in evangelical churches that have become affirming, and for them, they have to worry less about the denominations and more about donors in their pews. But once they figure out the money question, they're like, okay, we can move forward. There's no one they have to like please or ask permission from. They can just kind of make that call. And some churches, I think one of my co-founders, George, he was a pastor of evangelical mega church in Seattle, and his church lost like half its donors and half its funding, and had to fire a lot of people. And so, but his church was one of the first ones out of the gate. So I think people were just like, what the fuck? I mean, and that was like 2015. So,
Right.
But since then, there have been more churches that have done that. I belong to an evangelical church that has done something similar and has weathered the transition fine. We've lost people, but we've kept up, an ability to sustain ourselves financially. So I think now they're starting to band together to create the Open Progressive Evangelical Network, and that is becoming a loose network for these churches that have become orphaned a little bit.
Yeah, that is wild to me. So I had like a brief adventure through evangelicalism. I went to an evangelical school, and I was married in the Episcopal Church. That's like a long, very boring story, but it is so weird to kind of watch evangelicals wrestle through this issue. And I feel like church clarity is such a good way of specifically kind of holding accountable churches that don't have those disciplinary apparatuses. Have you kind of noticed anything with that? Like, do you feel like this is maybe one way that, you can deal with the challenge of evangelical and non-denom churches not having, a bishop that you can point to and be like, well, that guy isn't affirming, so probably that pastor's not either.
Yeah, no, I think we talk about that affirm on the FAQ, about the fact that there is no, pope you can submit your petitions to and say, please change all doctrine here and out, or policy here and out. I mean, I'm not sure if that's even how it works in the Catholic Church, but at least you kind of know who to submit your request to. In my head, the Pope is just like this guy who waves his wand and everything happens.
I actually kind of wish that he was, but sadly, no.
Yeah. Who knows what goes on in Pope Francis's head? But yes, but there's no clarity of policy that you can just apply across the board. So, if a church is part of the PCA, for instance, pretty much across the board if it's a PCA church, it's not affirming. But if a church is not denominational, you have to evaluate church on a church-by-church basis, which is labor-intensive. And so if you have a resource you can just pull up, it makes it a lot easier. And also, I think, if we can clarify it'd be almost like you're voting for going back to the political analogy, like if you support universal health care but you don't know who your representative is, or you don't know which representative is yours, or where your representative stands, or how to contact them, all that kind of stuff, it makes it really hard to actually mobilize your political representatives to do something. And I think non-denom churches hide behind a lot of screens and curtains so that they never get called to action, which makes it really hard to then call them to action on any point. So I think that's part of it. I had a question for you guys, actually, if you don't mind. Very last.
Of course.
What do you feel... Well, it's a question. I'm going to say what I think, but I want to know what you think. What do you think the equivalent of this might be for corporations? In a way, not just in theory, because there are also a lot of things that corporations are opaque about, but in a way where you could sort of crowdsource information to figure that information out. So our current thinking is, when it comes to policies, most churches, most businesses, let's just say, technically have non-discrimination clauses in most of their stuff. So it's not really too much a policy question, but there is a lot of lack of transparency about salaries and money, and who is paid what. And I mean, this is a small slice of the angle. There are many other things we could tackle, but this is something where I felt like, okay, what if we had a database where people uploaded their job title, the name of their organization, how much they make, and their gender and race. And then we were able to kind of clarify within an organizational structure what salary, hierarchy, transparency, all that looks like, and map that according to gender and race. That was something we're thinking about doing at potential, and I wanted to get your thoughts.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I don't really know that much about gathering data per se, I guess, but I was actually just talking with my partner Emily about money and how weird it is that people aren't very open about their wages, and they're not very open about their earnings for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's sort of culturally embarrassing to compare those notes sometimes, but I feel like it's actually really helpful to be open about those things. And maybe if you had a sort of anonymous way of making that clear, it would be easier to hold certain companies accountable or something, or at least maybe that would provide unions with a way of figuring out other pressure points that they could push, or I don't know. I mean, we're a revolutionary podcast, so that in part means that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about really helpful reformist practices, but that's not a way of disparaging them. It's just to say that I'm not very skilled at it, I guess. I don't know, Matt, what do you think? You think a lot about rhetoric.
I do a little bit. Yeah, well, I think that's a cool thing for sure. I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of I guess from a Christian perspective.
Surprise.
Yeah, I guess, right. My thoughts are, though, that, like, I don't know, Christians should have, like, a really particular sort of view about property, and that is, the view is, not to be proud of it, not to hoard it, and not to wield it against other people. And I think a website that collects data like that would be helpful, because, I don't know, you can be transparent about how much money you make and how much you're getting paid, and, like, maybe draw correlations between all those things. I don't know. I think that would be a valuable thing for people to self-report on that that kind of thing. Would be good. I don't know. It's not like a very hot take or a very nuanced one. It's just like, yeah, I think that's a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile. Just kind of like I don't know. I think it does a few things. It definitely gives other workers in the same place sort of like some bargaining power, like, why is this person get paid this much, or why does this person not get paid very much at all? And I think that is super useful. At the same time, it just kind of like expresses a certain type of position and orientation towards one's wage and private property that, like, I don't know, maybe it's not a big deal and, like, this is what I have. So there's maybe two sides of it like that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I work at a Christian institution, and they definitely keep like how much people get paid on the down low. No one's supposed to, like, really tell one another how much they're getting paid.
Is that
for
in your
something.
Contract? Because some companies do them. Like, you're
that's
not
a really good
supposed
question.
to disclose it.
I don't know if it's in my contract. I should probably check before I start telling people. Even if it was, I guess I wouldn't care that much. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's in the contract. I just know it's like sort of like a HR policy, like, maybe be cool about this or something. But I think it's good to share that information with your coworkers and build solidarity that way. Like, if someone's not getting paid the amount they should, like, you should know and raise a stink about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Not like letting your friends not get paid is really crappy. So maybe any way that there is to make that happen is good.
Yeah, the idea in part came about because we're thinking about, like, women in the workplace and gender stuff, but then I was also thinking my roommate works in a really prominent TV show that makes, like, millions of dollars in revenue, and she was trying to go up to get a raise, and her boss was like, actually, I'm making a policy not to know people's salaries and how much they get paid. And so if you want a raise, you have to go to the finance guy who controls, like, the budget. And so she has to, like, because there's no clarity, she has to do, like, research on how much she should be paid by talking to people at competitive companies, right? Like, what does someone in my job get paid? Okay. I have no clue what my coworkers get paid, but I'm just going to throw out a number and make a case for why I deserve to get that. It's all this labor is incumbent upon the individual. Now, obviously, if you're in union, that things are standardized and it's clear. Like, a couple of years, you make this. If you're a teacher, it's, like, very clear. As long as you know how many years someone's worked, more or less, you know how much they get paid. So, the benefit of that is not just the fact that it makes sure, like, companies can't do any funny things, but also that it's clear what people are being paid, so you can have conversations about it.
Yeah, I know that labor organizers would definitely be thankful for that website and that data gathering. Yeah. It's kind of like a guerrilla approach to that, though, right? Like, where you just have people sort of self-report on, like, their experiences working different places, and I don't know, people who organize labor unions and stuff would be, like, very keen to pick some of that up.
For sure. And if there are any other areas you think we should look into for, like, what corporate clarity might look like or something like that, let us know, because we're still, like, refining the idea, and I don't know if that was the best thing for me to talk about it now, but whatever, so to speak. Here it is.
Yeah,
we have a lot of, like, creative. Yeah, we have a lot of creative people who listen, so I don't know. Maybe something will kind of stick out to them. So that's good. Now you have a platform.
Yes. Tag us at churchclarity.com and tell us what corporate clarity should be about.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Sarah. Good luck on your very long flight to Hong Kong.
Thank you. This was fun. Thanks. I respect you guys and what you guys do, so thank you for letting me be here.
Cool, thanks. Maybe we can do it again in the future.
Yeah.
Sounds good. When we do corporate clarity, we'll do this again.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
All right, bye guys.
Cool.
See ya.
See you, Sarah. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. Thanks, Sarah, for coming on. Like you all heard at the end, there's all kinds of ways to get involved with the very cool projects that Sarah is up to. If you live in New York City, I guess you could get down with Religious Socialism there. I don't know. I don't know how the DSA works, but presumably, like, there's nothing stopping you from, doing it wherever you live. That's cool. Also, Church Clarity. That's a whole thing that you should submit your churches to and find out. Who knows? Maybe you're going to a church that is more affirming than you think. My cat is just scratching my table right now, but I'm not gonna stop her. Maybe you're going to a church that is you might be surprised. That's all I'm saying. So check that out. And lastly, Sarah asked for some brainstorming help, and we gave some off the cuff ideas. And maybe you have some ideas that are a little more put together. That would be great. You might as well help her out. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time. We're gonna let the illogical spoon play us out. All right, goodbye.
There won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night.